Good morning and welcome to the Morning Scoop for Friday, October 15th. This is your daily Buckeye fix. I'm Tom Orr. The Indiana game is in 8 days, the game against Michigan in 43 days. A few days ago, we learned officially that the Indiana game will kick off at 7:30 p.m. on ABC. But if you're familiar with the work of Matt Sarz, you would have had a pretty good idea that was going to be the case even before then. He runs Matt's college sports media blog. He knows all the ins and outs of how games end up on certain times and on certain TV channels. And with as much as people have been asking about why certain games were at noon or at night, it seemed like a great time to have him on. So, Matt, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Tom.
Well, this is the kind of weird college football minutia that I just love. I am super interested in all the behind the scenes machinations of, how all this stuff really works behind the scenes. How did you get interested in this? Enough so that you started your own site specifically for this?
So for me, I'm a software developer. I started doing this in around 2005, trying to learn some new technologies, and B, at the same time, I ended up getting a DirecTV system at my apartment. And as someone who grew up out of state, it was me trying to find out how I could watch the games that I preferred in my area. I grew up in Western New York, so for me, Syracuse football was a growth point for me. And not that, Ohio State football didn't interest me, but I was always looking for that Syracuse game where I could find it.
You can't turn down a chance to watch those Greg Robinson Syracuse teams. No, sir.
I very much could back then.
All right. So that's enough Syracuse talk. Let's start with the really high level stuff on the Big Ten front. In the Big Ten, the TV rights are split between Disney, which owns ABC, ESPN, Fox, which also owns FS1, has a share of the Big Ten network. So how do those networks decide who gets the first pick for big games like Ohio State, Michigan, or Ohio State, Penn State? How do they sort those out?
Sure. So going back to that rights agreement being signed, Fox Sports received preference when it came to selections on a per week basis. And essentially what they do is they draft essentially when they're going to pick in a given week, and they're typically eyeing games. And if you've noticed the past 4 years, I believe it is, Fox has pretty much reserved in advance Ohio State, Michigan, which more or less tells you that they're using their top choice every season on that game. It's typically their highest rated game. They want that first. And then from there, it's more or less every other pick. BTN slides in there somewhere. I think somewhere, after the top 10 or 15 games. So typically it's going through those picks and then getting into the week by week, you're then taking, all right, Fox has to choose first this week. ESPN might choose second. BTN might choose third or fourth. And then it might go, back up to Fox for maybe a cable TV selection or something like that. So it varies week by week, but it's done in a global view of the entire season in mind. And it's also, you're trying not to necessarily lock yourself to a particular game based on, a team may, let's say, have an injury with a player, and it's such a key injury, that team's season just falls right off. So you may not want to lock yourself into a game. Let's say Penn State, Ohio State, for example, we're coming up on. And we know that potentially Sean Clifford could be out for that game. That's my understanding. So that's still going to be a highly rated game. But let's say Clifford got injured 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago, and Penn State lost all their games coming in. It's less sexy of a matchup, and maybe Fox, if they have that first pick, or ABC, if they have that first pick, says, I want Michigan State instead.
So, how far in advance are these games? I mean, sometimes, Ohio State, Michigan got announced as a noon kick on Fox in July or something this year. It was crazy early. So, but, for example, the Penn State game, the Ohio State, Penn State game that you talked about, we don't know. We're 8 days out at this point, and we don't know yet exactly when and where. We have a guess, but we don't know exactly when and where that game is going to be announced. So when do those games get announced? I guess the game's 2 weeks out, not 1 week. Sorry, I can do math. There's a bye week.
Sorry.
So when do those games get announced? And then can you also explain what a 6-day hold is? Because that's an important thing here as well.
Sure. So what typically happens is in the spring, just to start back there a little bit, typically the first 3 weeks of the season, special dates such as weeknight games, or in the case of like Ohio State, Michigan, or I think earlier this season, Notre Dame, Wisconsin, which was a Big Ten control game. Those were set by television in advance. And sometimes, particularly with something like Ohio State, Michigan, and Notre Dame, Wisconsin, those networks may be looking to get some early buzz, some early marketing for advertisers, but that's neither here nor there. When it comes to the in-season stuff, it's 12 days out. So take the date of the game, go back 12 days. Usually that's a Monday. That's typically when that game time is going to be announced, game time and television broadcaster. If we come into that week and let's say, for example, I'm going to switch gears to the Big 12 briefly, because on Monday, all 4 games of theirs being played on the 26th. Yeah, 12 days out. Yeah, so it would have been on the 23rd, I think. Yeah, all 4 of their games on the 23rd were held by television, awaiting results of the game's results on the 16th, this coming Saturday. So the idea is networks want their best available choice, their best pick of games, and they're willing to wait. Does it inconvenience you or I going to tailgate and traveling to a game? Absolutely. But these networks pay so much. They have usually around 4 6-day holds per season. And when I say 4, that could be like 2 go to Fox, 2 go to Disney. So 4 out of 10 weeks, they could potentially hold all of the schedule for a conference in a given week, or maybe just 1 or 2 games.
So, that's kind of they're making a lot of those decisions on the top level. We sort of talked about how the first games of the week are picked. Once you get past those top games of the week, there are a bunch of considerations that go on some of the lesser games and where they get placed. You do your best guess column every week.
Yep.
And it's like, there's all sorts of things in there. It's just like, you wouldn't even think it would have anything to do with it. For example, there are rules about how often teams need to play on Big Ten Network. So can you explain some of those other rules that people might not know about?
Sure. So one of the key rules that influences Big Ten selections is Big Ten Network, and the goal of trying to get 2 games per school on the network every season. And one of those 2 games has to be against another Big Ten school. So it's typically, 1 non-conference game and then 1 Big Ten conference game. Sometimes if your non-conference schedule is, really valuable to television, you might have 2 games in the Big Ten schedule on BTN. So far, that won't affect Ohio State the rest of this season. With the Akron game and the Rutgers game already being picked up, Ohio State is free to be chosen by any network partners, and there isn't this situation where going back several years, there was a game against a ranked Wisconsin team that Ohio State played, and it was late in the season, and it was virtually locked into being played on BTN because I think the next week they were playing Michigan, and Ohio State had not fulfilled its 2-game, particularly the 1 game versus a conference opponent requirement.
So you do your best guess list every week. It's not always 100%, but it's generally fairly close. I mean, it's better than just darts at a dartboard by a wide margin. So can you walk us through how you actually put that together for the Big Ten in a week? What are you taking into consideration as you sort of build that out?
Sure. So there are considerations around, again, the BTN requirements. There's requirements regarding, I shouldn't say requirements, there's stipulations the Big Ten itself has with its network TV partners in terms of the number of times they are willing to play night games on ABC and Fox Sports. I think it's around a total of about 15 games between those 2. There's rules regarding homecoming games. Homecoming game times are set far in advance, and the Big Ten is really the only conference that I can still recall that locks those games into a start time and says this start time is where it's going to air, and you, the network partner, have to air it at that time, whether it's 12 noon or 7:30 at night, or there's a little bit of leeway in the afternoon because Fox sometimes starts their games at 4:00 instead of 3:30. So that's where I look at. Also, with respect to Fox in particular, there's the matter of, particularly this month, the MLB postseason, where they have to set aside, in this case, this coming weekend, mid-afternoon. There is no college football on your local Fox station. There will be ALCS Game 2. And on the 23rd, potential for a Game 7. Fox is also, we'll call them dark at night when it comes to college football. And I think in these particular two cases, FS1 is also carrying that game. So not only will Fox be dark, but FS1 won't be able to carry a game either. So those two places are typically keys. And like I said, as you get to November, you typically, I think it's after the first weekend of November, Big Ten schools prefer not to play at night, if at all possible. They really prefer no night games, play them during the day. Because of that, I believe the networks have what's called some sort of like a 21-day wait list. Essentially, they mark down, hey, we'd like to play these games at night. And they have to get approval of both schools to even consider playing that game at night. And I think there's only been a couple of those games that have actually ever occurred. I want to say maybe a odd like Northwestern Purdue game, and it wasn't anything that was, not saying that their games weren't a consequence or anything. It was just something where, hey, we need this window to fill, and you're available. Are you willing to play it at night?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of those things that I think people sort of maybe have a vague idea about. Like, yeah, the Big Ten in November, you need both teams. So, why would Ohio State approve playing a road night game at Nebraska or, Michigan State or wherever? And Michigan State's not going to approve playing a road night game at Ohio State, probably. I mean, that's you generally don't see those in November at all. I'm going to do my Matt Sarz impression from next week, and you can tell me how I'm doing. Ready? We know Fox always picks Ohio State, Michigan week first. We talked about that because they know that game's going to be a monster rating draw. Plus, ad rates are fantastic right before Christmas. So that's week number one. This year, Fox also had Ohio State versus Oregon. So that tells me that probably was the third week picked in the Big Ten, which means that Ohio State, Penn State is probably the second week picked, which means that's probably an ABC ESPN week. However, that's also Michigan State weekend. But to me, Ohio State is always the top TV draw. So that's probably the first pick, unless the Sean Clifford thing really changes something. But, Michigan State would probably be a fantastic second pick. So that's the big noon game. I'm not gonna even bother trying to figure out like the FS1 stuff. I'll leave that you the expert. But how do you think I'm doing? Is Ohio State, Penn State the ABC 7:30 game and Michigan State's big noon Saturday?
I tend to think so at this point. I really do. Particularly with Fox not having a night game. Not that there's a competition aspect involved in it. It's just a matter of Fox's, they're potentially doing their own thing, particularly with so we've got postseason here. That would be a World Series Saturday. So Fox is dark because of actually the World Series that particular Saturday. So they're not going to have a game on there. Noon, yeah, I would say probably Michigan State, because as I look at the rest of the landscape of what, let's say, Fox would choose, there's not anything really that would stick out, let's say, from the Big 12 early in that window, and there wouldn't be anything necessarily that they would choose anything from the Pac-12 at this moment over, and not that they're putting any Pac-12 games at 9 a.m. Pacific time this year. So I would say what you're kind of gauging and predicting is about right.
So we know the Indiana game at 7:30. So now officially we think the Penn State game will be likely a primetime game as well. Yep. We know Michigan's a noon kickoff on Fox. Do you have any sense for when and where the other three Ohio State games, which are at Nebraska, against Purdue, and Michigan State, do you know where those, do you have any sense at all for, the considerations that might go into that, even if you don't have hard and fast picks yet?
Yeah, so typically I do my picks no earlier than 13 days out. And kind of the reason I tend to shy away from getting too far ahead of myself is because there's always going to be a week where something goes a little bit haywire. Hence, for example, Texas A&M, Alabama the other week. I think everybody and their brother, when they saw that Texas A&M had lost to Arkansas, thought, wow, this is going to be a dog of a game. Texas A&M has no shot. And then we learned otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
And, everybody is going to get their everybody has a chance to beat anybody in a given week. Somebody is just going to, things happen. In terms of what we see with Michigan State, I think they're probably the best shot for something, for some sort of premier window. I have to refresh my memory on what date that is. Apologies for not having that.
That's the 19th. No, the 20th. The 20th. It's the week before.
Okay, so that'd be the week before the Michigan game. But you're looking at that point, you're getting into the 12 or 3:30 type deals. And one of the things that has been kind of interesting this year is it feels like Fox took a lot of their, we'll call first picks early in the season. Like you mentioned with Oregon, Ohio State, the Notre Dame, Wisconsin game, potentially Michigan, Wisconsin, and then Iowa, Penn State the other week. So I get the feeling that might be something that you look at that's ABC, maybe at 3:30, going that far in advance, because I think on the 20th also, if I'm just thinking it, like if we're looking at what networks want to put out there that's going to best compete with something, I think your mid-afternoon game might end up being like Alabama, Arkansas. So that's something I also try to look at is a little bit of like, what am I competing against? Like, for example, a couple weeks ago with Oklahoma, Texas, I had that game actually in mid-afternoon against Penn State, Iowa, where the networks decided that, nope, that's best at noon. I want that, or ABC wanted that at noon. And I think one of the things that actually made a difference in how that whole schedule was shaped was that was also Ohio State's homecoming game versus Maryland. That was locked to noon. So somebody had to take that at noon. And if ABC were to take it at noon, they would have had to put Red River at 3:30. So in terms of the three games you mentioned, though, I think Michigan State, Ohio State probably has the best shot at, kind of a nice dressed up treatment, probably from ABC at 3:30. I think Nebraska, unfortunately, that might end up being a pay TV game, might be an ESPN game, might be an Ohio, it might be a Fox Sports 1 game. The only thing that is kind of nice about Nebraska is they seem to be willing to play night games. I mean, I think that's their Big 12 history coming in there, where they're willing to play night games later in the season.
Well, we, as someone who travels with the team and goes to all these games, and for whom the TV schedule makes a very big difference, I will tell you I follow your work very closely. But for others who may not have checked out your site before, let people know where they can follow you on Twitter and where they can read your work.
Sure. My Twitter handle is Matt Sarz, MattSarz, and also at mattsarzsports.com. And you'll find links to schedules going back to 2005. There's also men's basketball on the site there, as we're approaching that season starting in about a little less than a month.
All right. Well, really appreciate you. First of all, appreciate all the work that you put in to do this, and then appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today.
Thanks, Tom.
And Matt and I were chatting after we finished recording that, and he realized he had forgotten one thing for the October 30th week that we were talking about with Ohio State, Penn State, and Michigan State. The Iowa-Wisconsin game is locked to noon next week. So if you see Michigan State booted from noon, that maybe that's why, maybe Michigan State ends up on another channel at 3:30 or something like that. If that's the case, that's why. When I say there's lots of considerations that go into this stuff, that's one of those things that could be. So you're going to watch Iowa-Wisconsin at noon somewhere next week. You might be watching Michigan State at noon at somewhere the next week as well, but we'll have to wait until next week at least to find out where it is. So that'll be the October 30th games. So thank you again to Matt for joining me for the what I think hopefully was a really interesting conversation. That was sort of the nuts and bolts behind a lot of the questions we get. We get a lot of like, why is this on TV at this time? Why is this on this channel? That is the long answer of the why, sort of showing his work as far as why some of those decisions get made. So hopefully you guys found that as interesting as I did. And hopefully you guys can enjoy the games this weekend as well. One place that's be a fantastic place to enjoy all of the games and all of the rest of the season is at BuckeyeScoop.com. We have a fantastic team of insiders providing insight and analysis you just can't get anywhere else. You can sign up today at BuckeyeScoop.com and get access to our Ask the Insiders board, where we have all sorts of fun, great community, fun conversations about Ohio State games, other games, college football in general, lots of college football playoff talk starting to ramp up now, and much, much more. That's all at BuckeyeScoop.com. And if you are listening on your podcast platform of choice, you should check out some of our other great podcasts. You can search Buckeye Scoop to find all of those. We would greatly appreciate it if you leave us a 5-star rating and review, because what happens is that helps other folks find those shows. That'll make them pop up in some of those algorithms that whatever those magical podcast algorithms are. More good rating and reviews makes them show up for other folks. So if we do appreciate it if you'd leave us a nice review. And finally, if you're watching this on YouTube, hit that bell, subscribe to our YouTube channel. You'll also have a little Buckeye Scoop logo that'll pop up in the right-hand side of the screen in just a second. That will, if you click on that, it will subscribe you to our channel, and then you get notified every time we post a new video. So that can mean a pregame show, a postgame show, player interviews, new podcasts. It's all free. It's all on YouTube, youtube.com/Buckeye Scoop. Subscribe and get notified every time we post a new video. That'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.